شكرا السيدة الرئيس على عقد هذا الاجتماع.
Thank you, Madam President, for holding this meeting. After my government's request for an urgent meeting to study the fallout from the unilateral decision taken by the President of the United States with regard to the Syrian occupied Golan. Before reading my statement, I'd like to make a couple of observations. First, to the delegations of Security Council, I will be sending a detailed statement tomorrow reflecting my government's stance on this position with regard to the truth and the reality of the situation of UNDOF in the Syrian occupied Golan. This is a position that we revisit every 6 months, so no doubt you'll have detailed information on this. And on the extension of UNDOF in Golan. I raise this issue because our topic today is not that, but rather a measure taken by the U.S. administration against an occupied land based on what we've heard from most of you. And I'd just like to correct a term which some of my colleagues have used, not all. The Syrian occupied Golan, that is the term that one finds in resolutions and in the archives. So it's called the Syrian occupied Golan, occupied Syrian Golan, but not the Golan Heights. That's an Israeli term. It's an Israeli created term after 1967, and it's a term that dates back to medieval times when the armies occupied mountains as a strategic site. So they're trying to say that it's a strategic height that they need to control in order to be able to maneuver on the heights. But it's not heights. There are rivers, there are valleys, mountains, plains, even cities in this area. So that was my second comment. Third, in some meetings, and at the very moment when this meeting was starting at 5 p.m., Israel conducted air bomb strikes against the Sher Nazar area in Aleppo, 500 kilometers away from the Golan. So we have an airstrike, an Israeli airstrike in Aleppo. Material damage, and the Syrian air defenses were able to intercept some of the missiles that were launched against Aleppo. So those are the three observations I had to start with. Now, Madam President, I shall read my statement. If I may, I'd like to begin by reading part of a message that came to me a short time ago this afternoon that was addressed to you, the Security Council, that is, both members and the presidency. It's a little girl in the Syrian Golan. Here's her photograph. Everyone can see it. Please look at the picture of the little girl. My American colleague, I don't know if you can see this picture, but I'm trying to show it to you. So the message from this little girl, the Syrian little girl, I just showed you her picture. She's from Golan, and she says, and I quote, "My name is Dimash Al-Madi. I'm 10 years old. I'm from the occupied Syrian Golan, from the town or village of Mashtashash. I live under Israeli occupation, and I say to the world that we children in the occupied Syrian Golan our lives will not be determined by the occupying power of the Israelis, but rather they will be determined by our dreams, by our innocence, our destiny, which we live out in the land of our fathers and our grandfathers. And our dream of freedom will remain our dream around having our motherland returned to us. End of quote. Madam President, my country, the Syrian Arab Republic, condemns the illegal statement made by the President of the United States of America on the 25th of March. A statement made about the legal status of the occupied Syrian Golan. My country's government considers that piece of paper signed by President Trump on that date and offered as a gift to the Prime Minister of the occupying authority is a unilateral statement by one party which has neither the political legitimacy, legal or moral legitimacy to make such a decision and decide the destiny of other peoples of the world or the lands and to whom they would belong, land that in this case belongs to my country, the Syrian Arab Republic. They cannot make such proclamations. These American practices are dangerous. They're dangerous because they represent a blind and unprecedented tendency of this administration to twist international policy, humiliate the United Nations, and run roughshod over all resolutions of this Council and the General Assembly with regard to the Arab-Israeli conflict, as to the unavoidable need of putting an end to the Israeli occupation of the Arab lands going back to 4 June 1967. In Resolution 479 of 1981, a resolution which you all referenced in your statements, in this Resolution 497, it recognized that this land, the Golan, is occupied, and that all the Israeli occupation of the territory and the measures taken are null and void and have no legal effect. Everyone in this Council, including that member representing the United States, recognizes that the peace process in the Middle East was launched in 91 based on the relevant resolutions 497, 242, and 380, all of which stipulate the illegality of seizing land by force and not recognizing Israel's sovereignty, which is an occupying power, over any of the lands occupied since the 5th of June 1967. These resolutions also reference the need to put an end to the Israeli occupation of these lands as a sine qua non condition for restoring comprehensive and fair peace to the Middle East. This is a legal issue which no U.S. administration in the past has denied. No American administration in the past has denied these references. I repeat that. Until this administration. And as I just said, ladies and gentlemen, a piece of paper signed by the U.S. President and offered with a pen to Netanyahu before the world is unilateral behavior which has no legal or political value. This unilateral behavior, which is also clear evidence of the fact that the U.S. administration does not give any weight to the United Nations. It's withdrawing its recognition of the international body, and today the administration is refusing and running counter to all efforts trying to restore peace in the Middle East, which means that the U.S. administration is declaring the end of its role as a mediator for the peace process in the Middle East, and is sounding the bell to that effect, and is increasing escalation and confrontation in the area. This is a serious crossroads we find ourselves at, both for the United Nations and the international community. This U.S. proclamation is a slap in the face to the entire world, given the historical and true role of the United Nations and the Security Council. since the Security Council is first and foremost responsible for maintaining international peace and security and to defend international peace and life, to defend the Charter, the references and international legal heritage accumulated over decades based on the refusal of recognition of the Israeli occupation of the Golan and condemnation of this occupation is a call to put an end to it definitively. And my country heartily applauds all of those statements which followed to reject what the U.S. administration proclaimed. My country would also thank all those countries who supported the holding of this meeting, which is very important. We see in the positions taken and the statements made by the majority of governments in the world and also by the majority of members of the Council a serious and important step in the right direction, showing that world public opinion is isolating the United States and Israel, that they are operating outside international law, and they are a direct threat to international peace and security. Madam President, let's be clear and let's be direct. The United States, in its illegal proclamation made by its president, is running against its commitments under the Charter, under the principles of international law and Security Council resolution, knowing that the United States is a permanent member of the Council. One should bear that in mind. And since the U.S. delegation is pleased in its statement to talk about violations of international law or breach of international law, well, the crucial question here, the question that we ask with vehemence today is the following. Who is going to ask the United States to be held accountable for the violations of the Security Council resolutions 338, 242, and 497? Is the United Nations not supposed to deal with these flagrant violations of these resolutions by recovering its role and legal mandate, which was taken away by the United States? And this with a view to implementing your resolutions 338 and 497. In the eyes of the people of the Syrian Arab Republic of the United States, is a country which is now an enemy. It's outside the law. It is occupying part of our land after a direct involvement in the murder of millions of Syrians and destroying our economy, our natural resources, and our infrastructure. Moreover, be it by supporting terrorism or by imposing an economic embargo or military aggression, direct aggression against our country, the United States has led the so-called international coalition against the OEL and signed a paper that is a threat to international peace and security. This was an attempt to manipulate history and geography, as the former deceased President Charles de Gaulle said. And the U.S. President is an extremist and an enemy and believed mistakenly that the terrorist war against Syria would be enough to break the will of the people of our country, or that 8 years of fighting extremism and terrorism would be enough to change Syria's priorities and the priorities of its government, its people, and its army. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the Council, Madam President, the issue that we're looking at now goes to the very conscience of mankind and goes back to the inspirations of lasting peace. And so here the matter is, have we closely contemplated the real consequences of the United States occupation, a permanent member of this Council, and significant host of the United Nations in its country, contemplating the true consequences of this breach by the United States, which is a permanent member of the Council, of obligations incumbent upon it by your resolutions? Have we looked at the real reasons behind the violations of international agreements and conventions to guarantee international peace and security? Have we looked at its withdrawal from international agreements such as the Human Rights Council, UNESCO, or other agencies, or its withdrawal of financing for UNRWA, for example? These are questions which I bring to you, ladies and gentlemen of the Council. The U.S. administration is trying to protect its Israeli friends, but there's a real risk here for international peace and security, especially because the Israeli occupation continues. Given the rejected and fictional stories that abound, which undermine the stability of this region, or by creating wars and chaos, which would lead to a loss of all control in the area. Today, we are describing facts which are indisputable. You know, no doubt, that those who fabricate, manufacture wars and fuel them in the world is a party that does not respect international law, and we cannot trust responsibility for international peace and security to that country. If the Security Council had dealt with the destruction of Iraq from the very beginning, we would not be in this unprecedented situation of today of complete disdain for international law, for Security Council and GA resolutions with regard to international peace and security. Ultimately, UN action vis-a-vis American dangerous actions will leave people under occupation with just one choice, which is the principle of using force. It will be the only way to restore peace is by a force. This is because of the inaction displayed given the situation. The Syrian Arab Golan is ours. It will come back to us. Don't be misguided by thinking that one day this land will be yours due to hypocrisy or due to being a pawn in an electoral game, a game where you bring each other support so that the Israelis can succeed in their elections and so that the Americans can also get support from the Israeli lobbying groups in the United States. The American administration may want to show some generosity vis-a-vis the Israelis, and if they wish to do so, we would invite them to not put their hands on what doesn't belong to them. U.S. is endowed with lands which extend far and wide. Give those states to the Israelis, for example. You could give them North and South Carolina, for example. Why not? South Carolina is a great piece of land. In fact, this has been encouraged by some. So give them a state or two in the United States. Give Israel a couple of states if this administration really wants to have Israeli support. By way of conclusion, Madam President, my country's delegation rejects all attempts by the representative of Germany, and note I said the representative of Germany and not of the German regime, because it would be shameful to say representative of a regime in this environment. So we reject any attempts by the representative of Germany to try and make this meeting deviate from its purpose and main subject. This is not up to its capacity as a diplomat and capacity as a member of the Security Council or the protocol of speeches vis-a-vis my country. My country is a founding nation of the United Nations. In other words, we were victorious against the Nazis, dear colleagues. The United Nations organizations arose from the ashes of the Second World War, which caused the death of 85 million people due to a poor reading of politics by your country, dear friend, colleague from Germany. a war which today, like your political reading, which is incorrect against my country, and incorrect with regard to the purpose of this meeting. I will not extend my remarks. I just wish to say that you've brought shame to your own country. I have spent years in this organization, and it is shameful that we cannot communicate based on the legal rules or that we would not respect the rules of procedure here. Thank you.
Je remercie